The Book of Enoch. Imagine a book that claims angels came down from heaven to sleep with human women, creating a race of giants that nearly destroyed the world. The early church banned it, not just because it was bizarre, but because it challenged everything they wanted Christianity to be. That's the Book of Enoch, a wild and apocalyptic text attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. It expands on a short line from Genesis with shocking detail. In one of its main sections, 200 angels called the Watchers abandon heaven, marry human women, and father the Nephilim, violent giants who devour everything, even people. God eventually sends the great flood to wipe them out. But it doesn't stop there. The book also describes a coming judgment and visions of heaven. It introduces a mysterious figure called the Son of Man, who will punish the wicked and reward the righteous. Early church leaders rejected it. The stories were too extreme, and the cosmic drama too far removed from the emerging Christian message. It didn't fit their theology, so it was left out. Still, the Book of Enoch left its mark. The New Testament book of Jude quotes it directly, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church never banned it at all. They still consider it part of their Bible today. The Gospel of Judas. Everything you thought you knew about Judas is wrong. He wasn't the greedy traitor who sold out Jesus for money. He was actually the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' mission. That's exactly what the Gospel of Judas claims, and it's why the early church banned it as dangerous lies. Found in a crumbling codex in Egypt and only fully translated in the early 2000s, this ancient text flips the most infamous betrayal in history on its head. In this account, Judas doesn't betray Jesus out of greed, he follows orders. Jesus, knowing what must happen, privately tells Judas to hand him over, so that his spiritual self can be freed from his physical body. The other disciples, according to this gospel, misunderstand everything. They worship a lesser God and cling to a flawed material vision of faith. Judas alone sees the truth, that Jesus comes from a higher, hidden divine realm. These were core ideas of Gnosticism, an early Christian movement that thought secret knowledge was the key to salvation. And for the mainstream church, this was dangerous. It denied the value of Jesus' death, questioned the authority of the apostles, and turned Judas from a traitor into a chosen one. Declared heresy by the year 180, the Gospel of Judas was silenced for nearly 2,000 years, but its radical take on Jesus' mission still sparks debate today. The Acts of Paul and Thecla, a woman preaching, baptizing herself, and surviving multiple execution attempts. That was too much for the early church to accept. The Acts of Paul and Thecla was banned because it portrayed a female apostle defying the gender roles that church leaders were trying to enforce. This powerful story follows Thecla, a young noblewoman who hears the apostle Paul preach about purity and devotion to Christ. She's so moved that she breaks off her engagement, gives up her wealth, and chooses a life of radical discipleship. Her decision sparks outrage, and she's sentenced to death twice. First, she's tied to a stake, but a sudden storm puts out the fire. Later, she's thrown to wild animals, but the lions refuse to harm her. These miracles convince many that she's protected by God, so Thecla begins healing others and baptizing herself, all without male supervision. And that's why the story was banned. It didn't just tell of a woman's faith, it showed her leading. In an era when church leadership was being consolidated under male authority, Thecla's independence was seen as a threat. Despite being excluded from the official canon, the text spread widely, especially among early Christian women, who saw in Thecla a model of courage and spiritual power. The Gospel of Mary. Imagine a gospel where Mary Magdalene is portrayed as spiritually superior to all the male disciples, including Peter. That was something early church leaders couldn't allow. The Gospel of Mary was banned because it gave Mary Magdalene authority over the male apostles and challenged the very structure of church leadership. In this text, Mary comforts the disciples after Jesus' departure, then shares private teachings he supposedly gave only to her. She describes the soul's journey through invisible realms, teaching that salvation comes not through rituals or clergy, but through inner spiritual knowledge. But when she finishes speaking, Peter and Andrew push back. They question her, not because of what she said, but because she's a woman. Peter even asks if Jesus really would have preferred her over them. What makes this gospel so controversial isn't just the gender dynamic, it's the theology. The Gospel of Mary, like other Gnostic texts, rejects the need for institutional religion. It teaches that divine truth is already within us. This completely undermined the authority of the early church. No priests, no hierarchy, and a woman at the center of it all. That's why the Gospel of Mary was labeled heresy and disappeared for centuries, until a fragment was discovered in Egypt in the late 19th century, the Gospel of Thomas. In this book, there's no crucifixion, no resurrection, no mention of Jesus dying for anyone's sins. The Gospel of Thomas presents a completely different version of Jesus, one who came to share secret wisdom, not to save the world through his death. That's exactly why the early church banned it from the Bible. This banned gospel is basically a collection of 114 mysterious teachings attributed to Jesus. Instead of telling stories about miracles and parables, it reads more like a spiritual riddle book. Jesus says things like, "Split a piece of wood and I am there," and "When you make the two one, you will become sons of man." The book presents Jesus as a wisdom teacher who came to wake people up spiritually, not as a Messiah who needed to die and rise again. According to Thomas, salvation comes from understanding these hidden teachings, not from believing in Jesus' sacrifice. Church leaders absolutely rejected this version of Christianity. The whole foundation of their faith was built on Jesus' death and resurrection. A gospel that completely ignored the crucifixion, the most important event in Christianity, was seen as dangerous heresy that missed the entire point of Jesus' mission. The Gospel of Thomas offered a completely different path to God, and the church wasn't having it. The Gospel of Philip, a gospel that hinted Jesus shared secret rituals with Mary Magdalene and possibly loved her more than any other disciple, was never going to survive the early church's approval. The Gospel of Philip was banned because it taught a mystical path to salvation and portrayed Jesus in ways the institutional church found too human and too radical. This text isn't a biography of Jesus. It's more like a spiritual guidebook. It describes mysterious practices, especially the so-called bridal chamber, a symbolic ritual meant to reunite the soul with God through spiritual union. According to this gospel, true salvation doesn't come through standard church practices like baptism or communion. Instead, it's achieved through deeper, hidden experiences of divine connection. The gospel also describes Mary Magdalene as Jesus' closest companion, the one he loved more than all the disciples. A damaged passage even mentions that he kissed her often, though scholars debate whether that was literal or metaphorical. Either way, early church leaders saw this text as a direct threat. It rejected their rituals and portrayed Mary, a woman, as holding privileged spiritual knowledge. For a church focused on hierarchy and control, the Gospel of Philip was far too subversive to keep. The Apocalypse of Peter, a book that describes hell in brutal, graphic detail, then suggests that even the damned might one day be forgiven, was too much for the early church to handle. The Apocalypse of Peter was banned because it challenged the nature of judgment and eternal punishment. Written in the 2nd century, this text claims to record a vision given to Peter by Jesus himself. In it, Peter is shown the fates of souls after death, the righteous in paradise, and the wicked suffering in terrifying ways. Blasphemers hang by their tongues, usurers sink in boiling blood, liars have their lips cut off again and again. Each sin receives a punishment that fits, and none are sugar-coated. But what really disturbed church leaders was the ending. The book hints that these punishments might not last forever, that eventually the damned could be released and find peace. This early glimpse of universal salvation directly contradicted the emerging doctrine of eternal hell. Combined with its horror-like imagery and overwhelming focus on punishment, the Apocalypse of Peter was deemed unsuitable for Christian teaching. While it was popular for a time, even read in some churches, it was ultimately banned and replaced by the more restrained Book of Revelation. Still, its haunting vision of the afterlife left a lasting mark. The Protoevangelium of James, a gospel that tells the story of Mary's birth, childhood, and even claims she remained a virgin her entire life. The Protoevangelium of James was banned because it expanded the story of Jesus' mother far beyond what the Bible ever said. Written around 150 AD and attributed to James, the brother of Jesus, this text fills in the early years of Mary's life. It introduces her parents, Joachim and Anna, who miraculously conceive her after years of infertility. Mary is dedicated to the temple as a child, grows up in purity, and is later chosen to be the mother of Jesus. According to this gospel, she remains a virgin before, during, and even after giving birth, a claim not found in the New Testament. These ideas deeply shaped Christian art and doctrine. The belief in Mary's lifelong virginity and her special role in salvation history all trace back to this book, not to the four Gospels. That made church leaders uneasy. The book was eventually condemned in the 5th century, partly because its stories went beyond Scripture and partly because its authorship was doubtful. But the Protoevangelium never disappeared. It continued to influence Marian feast days and even passages in the Quran. Though banned, it helped define who Mary would become for centuries to come. And that wraps up some of the most fascinating books ever banned from the Bible. If this helped you understand what didn't make the cut and why, give it a like, subscribe for more breakdowns on Christianity and lost texts, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next.